Hello and welcome to the First and 10 podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Feltz, here in Indianapolis, Indiana. Recording this just after midnight, January 11th, going on the 12th. A couple minutes ago, the national championship finished up down in South Florida. Final score Alabama 55, Ohio State 24. Buckeyes fall well short. Can't get it done on the national stage, final game of the season. The season has come to an end, and Alabama is the national champion. Reid, what are your thoughts after a really disheartening performance by the Buckeyes?
Well, they were the better team, and they proved it here. And obviously, you look at an Ohio State team who doesn't have Trey Sermon, they don't have Tommy Togiai, they don't have Tyreek Smith, three huge playmakers and guys you rely on in a game like this. And I think if those guys are there, we're talking about a different football game. But it's not time for excuses. Alabama proved they are the by far best team in the nation, and Ohio State, they had opportunities. They didn't capitalize when they were given those opportunities. So they capitalized rarely. But I mean, for Ohio State to win this game, they would need to play a perfect game and then still get some help. And this game was just a testament to how good Alabama was, honestly. And you know, I underestimated them, but I mean, we hadn't seen this Alabama game all season. We'd seen really good football from them against Texas A&M, Georgia, Florida. I think their game against Notre Dame wasn't fantastic, but I mean they were good, you know. But this was kind of like Alabama's version of the Ohio State Sugar Bowl. This was the game where they really, everything went their way. They pretty much executed perfectly. They did everything they needed to do, and they were pretty much unstoppable. So, they were the better team. They earned it, and congratulations to them.
After the way Ohio State played against Clemson and the way, frankly, Alabama played against Notre Dame, which was very good, obviously because of their talent, but really not amazing, not incredible or anything like that. That's why I picked Ohio State to win the game. I was dead wrong, and I will be the first to admit that. I was absolutely 100% wrong about this. But Alabama did everything I expected them to do. They scored early, they scored often, and they basically just gave the ball to Devontae Smith and said, have fun, because Seven Banks and most importantly, Sean Wade and even Tough Borland, who was on him in coverage, which is a completely different issue on one touchdown play. Those Ohio State defensive backs just couldn't handle him. He had more yards than the entire Ohio State team in the first half. Devontae Smith was just too much to handle. And it was not just the defensive backs being bad, but the fact that Ohio State couldn't create pressure. It really allowed those defensive backs to be exposed. And they couldn't create pressure really because no Tommy Togiai, no Tyreek Smith. That was, I think, the difference maker of the defensive side of the ball. And I'm not saying that having those two players changes everything for Ohio State, because I still do think with the performance they gave in on both sides of the ball, they end up losing the game. But it did change a lot. And if they were able to create pressure, maybe a couple of those times where Mac Jones had a ton of time to throw, pocket didn't really collapse on him ever, except for that one fumble. Uh, who knows? Maybe a couple of those you get a sack instead of giving up an easy, 40-yard bomb to Devontae where he's wide open because Seven Banks couldn't guard a chair. So, I mean, I'm not saying that those two players change everything, but I do think it is a pretty different game, at least on that side of the ball. Maybe if you do have them for Ohio State.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the kind of game where you wish you have a guy like Jeff Okuda or even Damon Arnett. This is the kind of game where you wish you had that OSU DBU kind of guy. They just don't really have him this season. We thought that's what Sean Wade was going to be, and I hate to talk badly about a Division I athlete, especially somebody who's at a program like Ohio State, because obviously they're tremendous athletes, all of them, whether it's first team or practice squad. They're all extremely talented athletes. And they work hard, and it's something I could never do. But I mean, Sean Wade has just been. I can't even put into words how disappointed I am by what he's done this season, and we've seen it since the beginning. Week 2 against Penn State, Jahan Dotson. I mean, and Jahan Dotson is an incredible receiver, but Dotson just exposed that man, and we saw it throughout the season. Ty Freifogel, another tremendous receiver, but I mean, even as good as Freifogel is, you got to lock him up better than he did, and it's just hard to look at the way he's played, and it's like I said a billion times, it's puzzling the fact that he was the first team All American, But the audacity that Wade had to be talking trash about Devontae Smith going into this game.
It's laughable. It's laughable. And you say it's crazy for him to be a first team All American. Honestly, it's absolutely ludicrous for him to be a first team All Big Ten player over guys like Tywan Mullen and Jamar Johnson. Uh, that's unbelievable. And this whole Ohio State defensive back group was liability all season long. And I said it going into the game, if Ohio State's going to lose, it's because their defensive backs let them down yet again, and the offense just can't respond to it because the DBs are letting uh, the Alabama receivers run all over him. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. And the Alabama receivers really did what receivers have done all season long to these Ohio State defensive backs. And usually the Ohio State offense is good enough to make up for that. And they had been all season. They were 7-0. They just weren't tonight. And you really can't expect your offense to be perfect every night. They were all but perfect against Clemson. You can't expect them to do that every night. So when your defense is so just miserable, and they really were miserable tonight, sometimes you got to understand that your offense isn't going to be Superman and save the day every single game. And for Ohio State, that's exactly what happened. Their offense just had an okay game, didn't capitalize on nearly enough of those opportunities they had. But you know, that's going to happen sometimes. And a truly great team, a championship team, is going to be able to deal with a mediocre performance on one side of the ball. And this Ohio State team just can't. And that's because the defense can't step up. And again, Tyreek Smith and Tommy Togiai aren't there, so you're not creating pressure the same way. But you really can't have any excuse for the performance that these defensive backs turned in. Even having those two guys, again, it changes a lot, but it doesn't change nearly enough, I think, to win this football game for the Bucks.
Yeah, and talking about those two defensive linemen who are missing, I would say Tommy Togiai, either him or Haskell Garrett, one of those two, you'd have to say is the best defensive lineman on this team. But I mean, Tyreek Smith, as much as a Tyreek Smith fan as I am, and as much as I love to praise him, he's not even one of the best 4 defensive linemen on the team. I'd say I would put him at number 5 or 6.
Yeah,
in incredible group of defensive linemen. So I mean, Tyreek Smith, don't get me wrong, he balled out against Clemson. He was a huge reason why.
and that's the thing. It's because of that performance against Clemson why I'd lump him in there as being so important.
Yeah, but I mean, Tyreek Smith on his own. You look at Tommy Togiai, you could say he's a game changer. Tyreek Smith, as great of a player as he is an individual, is not going to change the game. At least not right now at this point in his career. But I mean, going in this game, we said that, or at least I said in our pregame podcast, part of the reason I thought Jalen Waddle was going to be, him playing was going to change little to nothing, is that we know these wide receivers are going to expose the defensive backs no matter what. And essentially the game plan, at least for me, was, these defensive backs are not going to be able to, they're not going to help you out. So the rest of the defense and, the passing offense mainly has to be able to make up for it. You have to win in a shootout. You have to win by scoring a lot of points. And, it simply wasn't there. And it just seemed like once Alabama started getting points on the board late in the second quarter, we just didn't want it enough. I mean, there was, I want to say 2 minutes left in this half, something like that. And, it's a 2nd and 17 and we decide, all right, well, that's it. That's game.
Yeah, they just hand the ball off twice. I remember the exact drive. And I'm screaming at the TV like Alabama needs to start calling timeouts because they can get the ball back and they can put another touchdown on the board.
They could have got a touchdown, then got another touchdown when they get the
Ohio
ball.
State effectively gave up with 3 minutes left in the second quarter.
But I mean,
that's unacceptable. And honestly, that's pathetic, is what it is. That's absolutely pathetic. Just really a pathetic offense, a pathetic performance, really, by this coaching staff.
And I knew the defensive backs were going to play the way they did.
Because they had all season.
But in a game like this, as bad, as poor as these defensive backs have been all season, you got to make a big play. You got to make one stop. You got to get one pick or 1 3 and out. Basically, you got to get off the field one time. You got to make one big contribution, and it really wasn't there. There was like one good pass breakup that happened in this game, and it ended up affecting nothing. You need one drive-stopping, momentum-changing play that's going to get your offense on the field. And I mean, Alabama, you got to give them a lot of credit the way they chewed clock. I mean, They took 8 minutes on I want to say their first. I think it was their first drive of the half. They took 8 minutes off the clock. That is insane. And once again, just like everything in this game, it's a testament to this Alabama team, their coaching, their players, their execution, all that. Um, but I will say this about Ohio State. I said this in our pregame podcast, and I stand by it. Um, you still got to be proud of this team this season. You know, you go into the season. I think Ohio State really has three goals going into every season. First and foremost, you got to beat Michigan. That's the number one priority, no matter what. Number two, probably win the Big Ten. And number three is go win a national championship. And we've only done that one time in the playoff era, and we got close this year. And obviously, you know, Ohio State was unable to beat Michigan this year. The game didn't happen. But they got a Big Ten championship. They got some sweet revenge in Clemson, which pretty much felt as good as a Michigan win. And in a season where stuff is so crazy, you don't even know if you're going to be playing games. The fact that this team was able to even make it to the national championship and really just put the smackdown on Clemson. I mean, that game wasn't even close. Just this team as a whole, as much as they disappointed tonight, you still got to be proud of them. And I think, you know, they got destroyed by Bama, but I don't think you can say anybody else is the second team in the country, second best team in the country. Certainly not Clemson the way they performed against Ohio State. But you got to be proud of these guys. You got to be proud of what they've accomplished in such a crazy year. And it's unfortunate that there's a 99.999 repeating chance that Justin Fields never plays another snap for Ohio State. Similar odds for Chris Olave, unfortunately. But you know, you got to look back on the season fondly. And as much as Ohio State really didn't put together too many great performances in the regular season, that Clemson game alone really saved the season in my eyes. And you know, I still think you got to look back on this season with pride, and you got to be happy with what the players are able to accomplish. And I mean, honestly, unless you had Chase Young and Jeff Okudah on that defense, I don't think anyone's stopping Alabama this year. So you can't really beat yourself up about that.
Yeah, this Alabama team was ultimately just too good. I underestimated them. You underestimated them. It is what it is. But yet, it still is kind of a disappointing finish to the season. You know, leaves a little bit of a sour taste in your mouth. But I don't think it's not the same sour taste you had after the Clemson game last season, where it's like you're gonna run back the same group of guys, and you've got a chance to go get them and win the national championship, take down Clemson. A lot of these guys are gone next season. Fields is most likely gone. Olave's probably gone. Trey Sermon's probably gone. You know, a lot of these other guys. Wade, for better or worse, is gone.
For better.
Unfortunately. Who would have saw that coming? Just a shocking drop off in play after he moved from the nickel to the outside. But you know, so much of this team is going to be different next year. And it's going to be a big question for Ryan Day if he can sustain the same amount of success, because while the talent is obviously there because it's Ohio State, a lot of moving parts, and you're not going to have Justin Fields, who has really been the key to these Ryan Day Ohio State teams. He's been the guy, obviously. So not having him, bringing in a new quarterback, likely CJ Stroud, you don't know what it's going to look like. So it's the first real test I think Ryan Day's had as the Ohio State football coach. And we're going to see if he's up for the challenge and if this team can go compete at the same level they have for his first two seasons in Columbus, because it's really not a given. I think this season, the guys in that locker room, and I said this before the Clemson game, felt like making the playoff, winning the Big Ten, all that was a given. And a lot of things, while this was obviously a great team, were kind of handed to them. You know, they didn't play the minimum required number of games. Big Ten tweaks the schedule for them. There, you're in. Big Ten even kind of full. You know, everybody like to say, "Oh, Nebraska brought back the Big Ten season." No, they didn't. They brought back the Big Ten season because Ohio State could win a national championship. So, a lot of things did happen along the way, kind of perfectly, just for Ohio State, and they always knew kind of they were going to make the playoff. And I don't think you're going to have that same feeling going into 2021. The playoff is not an absolute certainty. And a lot of these games, I think there is a real question if they can even make the playoff again next season, because, again, a lot of things stay the same. You're bringing back a lot of guys, but at the same time, this is going to be the first season without Justin Fields for Ryan Day. So can they adapt? Can they uh, really be the same team? I think there's a big question there, but at the same time, you do have to be optimistic about the outlook of Ohio State football. They've recruited so well. The talent is obviously going to be there. It's still Ohio State. I wouldn't get too down after this loss because I think they'll be back. If not next season, then one of these years.
Yeah, and I want to talk more about Ohio State's team next year and CJ Stroud, especially on a later date, and what I think is going to come with that. But, one thing I am worried about going into next season is last year that Clemson loss. Um, I'm a young guy. I haven't been around for very long. And, I've been an Ohio State fan, a passionate Ohio State fan for about 8 or 9 years now. So I don't have a great history as a fan, but I've certainly been around for some great ups and downs, mostly ups. And I would say that loss last season to Clemson in the Fiesta Bowl was the most heartbreaking, painful loss in my time as a sports fan. And as much as this one sucks, you look at this game and it's obviously sad. Ohio State lost to Alabama. You wanted to finish off that sort of Cinderella story season, or at least playoff, where everyone said they didn't belong. But I mean, that's mainly what it is. Just a little bit of sadness that it didn't come through. But you look at that Clemson game, and you're talking about a just rage that you weren't able to get that win. You want revenge. You want to come back and get these guys next year, and that's part of the reason they were able to win in such dominant fashion. So without that sort of factor, we might see something missing from this Ohio State team. And looking throughout this entire season, passion, heart, and drive was what was missing from this team. And that's part of why we almost lost to Indiana, almost lost to Northwestern, and really didn't blow out some of the teams that we should have blown out. So you go into next season with that same sort of nonchalant outlook where you don't really have that revenge mindset. And Ohio State might get caught sleeping one time or another.
Yeah, and looking at next season, I think the obvious candidates for potential trap games, because honestly, every regular season loss for Ohio State is kind of unexpected, if you ask me, because they don't lose in the regular season often. They haven't lost a regular season game under Ryan Day. Last regular season game they lost was the Purdue game in 2018. Really, the obvious candidates are certainly Oregon at home. Who knows if they're gonna be great? They won the Pac-12. I guess you have to mention. But they won the Pac-12 really on a technicality because Washington couldn't play in the Pac-12 championship due to COVID. So they're technical Pac-12 champions. How Pac-12 of them. But the real game you have to look at on that schedule is Indiana on the road. And Indiana returns just about everybody of consequence aside from Wap Fillier, who's going to the NFL and had a terrible bowl game. But I'll get into that once we talk about Indiana in our recap of the less important bowls. We're going to be doing that, by the way, Citrus Bowl, Outback Bowl, Duke's Mayo Bowl. We're going to talk about those in a separate podcast, which will be our final podcast of the 2020 season. But Wap Fillier will be back or not be back, and Jamar Johnson won't be back. But everybody else, including Ty Freifogel, and I guess there's still a word on Jerome Johnson, and Harry Kreider's not coming back either. But Indiana got a and Marcelino Ball will be back, yeah, and he's going to kind of replace Jamar Johnson at safety in that sort of role. But I mean, if everything Indiana loses, I think they replace somebody who's going to be just as good because Fillier kind of had a down year. They're bringing in DJ Matthews, a transfer from Florida State, who fills that same role. No Jamar Johnson. All right, you got Marcelino Ball. No Harry Kreider. Michigan's starting center transferred to Indiana. Excuse me. So you're losing guys, but they're replacing pretty much known quantities in those positions. Whereas with Ohio State, they're losing guys and there are question marks. Who is going to be the reliable receiver without Chris Olave, assuming he leaves? They're obviously very talented receivers, but Chris Olave is one of the most reliable players I've ever watched. You don't replace him easily, at least. Garrett Wilson's great. Jackson Smith-Njigba's great. It's tough to replace a guy like Chris Olave. Trey Sermon, assuming he leaves, the way he played in his really two good games at Ohio State, that's kind of irreplaceable, especially from what we saw from Master Teague tonight. And Justin Fields, I mean, that is a once in a generation kind of player. Not a whole lot of guys out there like Justin Fields, but the thing is, I think Indiana is going to be their toughest game next season, and if they can get past that one, I think there's a good chance that they're not only going to win the Big Ten, but probably make it to the playoff or at least the Rose Bowl next season. But Indiana is going to be their toughest test.
Yeah, I'm right about that. And, we'll see how CJ Stroud looks because we haven't really seen – I don't think he's attempted a single pass in his college career. At least he hasn't lately. He ran the ball once against Clemson, ran the ball a few times against Michigan State. But I'm excited to see what's to come from him. He's obviously a great runner from what we've seen so far. Basically, does he have a somewhat functioning arm? And with this receiving core, if he has at least a semi-functioning arm, they'll bail him out. But we'll get into that later on when we start previewing the next season. But
right,
obviously
we got a lot of time for that. Got 8 months until tonight, that first game of the season on September 4th against Minnesota.
Mm-hmm. But this game, it wasn't what we wanted to see, but I mean, this was kind of inevitable. And I wanted to have hope for my team, and I did, and I thought there was a chance we were going to win it. And I kind of got that gut feeling. You said you had it too, Patrick. But this Alabama team just really showed their true colors. They showed, obviously we know what kind of coaching they have. And, when everything goes right, I mean, there were so few mistakes on Alabama's side. Everything went their way. And that's not me complaining that they got lucky. It's me talking about how they executed perfectly. Ohio State, unfortunately, it seemed like they didn't want it enough. They weren't prepared enough. And certainly they didn't execute well enough. So put the blame on whoever you want. It really doesn't matter. Alabama puts up 50 points on really anybody, I think. So, not much more you can say. Alabama's the better team, but hopefully Ohio State comes out of this with some new kind of motivation, and we'll have an even better season next year.
You got to hope so, but a lot remains to be seen. A lot remains to be discussed between the two of us here on this podcast about this Ohio State team going into next season. One of the more interesting years we'll see from Ohio State, really in the last decade. Lot to really decide these next 8 months leading to the season. And tonight, though, disappointing, if not too surprising. I picked Ohio State to win this game, and even I really saw this coming, unfortunately. But that's just the way it is sometimes. And credit to Alabama for being really just a remarkable team that I kind of underrated all season. I think there is kind of an inevitability with Alabama, whereas we just kind of say, oh, yeah, Alabama's the best team, whatever. The same thing happened to Michael Jordan and LeBron James, where people just accept that they're the best player in the league, so they don't want to give them the MVP, even though they know they're the best player. It's like, oh, yeah, we'll give it to Karl Malone this year, even though everybody knew Michael was the best player in the league, or given the MVP to Steve Nash over, like, Shaq.
And, I think
it's things like that. We just kind of take Alabama for granted how good they are, and we don't stop and think, wow, this team is truly amazing. We just think, oh, yeah, they're good. But, hey, I kind of think that they're going to lose, where the reality is that they very, very, very rarely lose football games. And the fact that they lost 2 games in 2019 because, that's shocking when you really think about it. They lost 2 football games during a regular season last year. And it took LSU having one of the best teams in college football history and Gus Malzahn pulling the once every 3 years rabbit out of his ass to win a game. So I don't see Alabama losing 2 games again for a very long time. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think this Alabama team is one of the best in college football history. And it would be interesting to see this year's Alabama team go head-to-head with last year's LSU team, 2 of the greatest teams in the history of the sport, definitely 2 of the greatest teams in the playoff era. I think it's clearly those 2 are 1 and 2, with the Clemson team from 2018 probably being number 3 or number 4, right there with them. But
honestly, I'd lump the 2015 Ohio State team in there, even
I
though
would think
they didn't win a title.
Yeah, I mean, I will always defend the argument that the 2015 Ohio State team is one of the best in college football history, but
and certainly better than the 2014 squad.
Yeah, but not enough time in today's instant reaction podcast to get into all of that.
Yeah, that's a topic for a different episode.
That right now, anyway. I'm too salty about this loss to really make it fair, competent argument in favor of Ohio State.
Well, Reid, credit to you for coming on here and talking after what it was obviously a very disappointing loss. I can't say I could have done the same after the Outback Bowl, and that's obviously a very different stage.
Yeah,
two different stories, very different stage too, obviously. But I remember after that game, which we will talk about in a couple days, whenever we end up getting around to recording that show. I remember just curling up in a ball, the lights off under a blanket, and just having a splitting headache and just being kind of miserable for pretty much the rest of the day. And sometimes that's just how it is. This sport can take a toll on you, and that's kind of the beauty of it. There aren't a whole lot of sports out there that make you feel the way college football does. It really is a special game, and I'll miss this season. It was a weird season, just kind of going into the end of the season sort of thing, because this was the last FBS game of the season. It was a weird year, and we've all harped on that for about 9 months at this point, but it doesn't feel right that it's over. It just doesn't. This didn't feel like the end of the season. It was obviously a quite short season, just because the Big Ten didn't start until late October, but that was the 2020 season. It's come and gone. Didn't really feel like we got a whole lot of closure on it, but that was it. And hopefully things feel a lot more normal in 2021.
Yeah, you said it. Took the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah. But anyway, that'll do it for today's show. Ohio State falls to Alabama, 55-24. Pretty disappointing result, but
52-24.
52-24, excuse me. 55-24 was. Shame on Alabama for not being quite as good as that 2017 Iowa Hawkeye squad. That's just math, folks. But that'll do it for today's show. Thank you for listening to the First and 10 podcast, and we'll see you next time. Bye.